Hello and welcome again to the Persuasion Lab podcast. I'm your host, Moeed Amin, and the goal for this show is really to elevate the status and the performance of sales. So we're going to be covering a huge range of topics, more than just your traditional sales topics such as questioning, pitching, closing, although I hate that term, negotiating, etc. We're talking about the character of the individual, because success is more about the person you become rather than just the skills and the knowledge that you acquire. And when we think about the person that you become, there was a book I read recently called Sapiens by Noel Harari. And in there, he postulates a theory as to why Homo sapiens became the dominant human species. And it was really down to one main characteristic or evolutionary skill, which was communication. And our ability to actually evolve to be able to communicate in complex ways with more accuracy. So you might be thinking, well, what has this got to do with our evolution and how does it become dominant? Well, let's take a very simple example. Our ability to communicate in order to find desirable things as well as avoid painful things became a very big factor in our survival skills. So if you were able to communicate to the rest of your tribe, hey, if you want something nutritious in terms of food, go to this location and you will find it, but avoid it around this time because there tends to be a tiger there that's looking for its own meal and you don't want to be on its list. So that is a good example of how communication became so powerful that actually it became one of the main reasons for why we became the dominant species. And when it comes to sales, communication is so important. And our ability to be able to convey things clearly and in a way that's compelling and moves people to take action is one of the paramount areas for our success. And that's why today I'm really excited to have the guest on our show today. Now, he is someone that's been helping busy professionals communicate with clarity and confidence for the last 20 years. He is someone that he trained at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, and he was an actor for several years. And you might be thinking, what has acting got to do with communication? Actually, one of the things I have done is I've been trained by another actor in terms of improving my communication skills. So we're going to see some of that today. I met him when I joined one of the London chapters for the Toastmasters. And he was the president at the time. And I was so impressed by his skills and knowledge around communication that, really left an impression on me. And I thought, he would be an incredible addition to our show and to help you in terms of your communication, particularly in the virtual forms of communication as well. So I'm very excited to have him on the show. So please help me welcome Richard Fallon. Richard, welcome to the show.
Moe, thank you so much. What a grand introduction. I better live up to it, hadn't I suppose?
I know you will. So I mean, that was no false bravado whatsoever. So yeah, really excited to have you on the show. I guess one of the what was interesting was before we started the recording, we were talking about what's going on in terms of politics and especially the politicians' connections with us and the people who actually vote for them. And we talked about some very interesting things. So for any of you that are not in the UK, Boris Johnson lost some key areas in the by-elections just today, I believe. And we were talking around, how he is communicating with people and the level of trust as well. And you had a very interesting perspective, Richard. Maybe if we can start just sharing that, because I think it's very real for people to connect with politics, and it's an important part of our lives.
Yes, I did, didn't I? I just need to remember what that was now, Moe. I think it was something along the lines of, and this is not political in the sense it's not pro or contra any particular party or political belief. It's just that people begin to get fatigued if what you say, your message, doesn't correlate with the actions or how they experience the results of those actions. And I believe that's the case now with Mr. Johnson and his party. People are starting to move away because they're hearing messages which are not really backed up by their own experience. So there's a kind of inauthenticity about the whole process. Now, let's not fool ourselves for a minute. Mr. Johnson is expressing perhaps his own opinions when he speaks, but he's also thoroughly advised. So probably, although with him particularly in his communication style, I was going to say not a word leaves his lips without it being okayed, but clearly he's a bit of his own man in that case, and often makes blips and errors. But the point being that when you stand up and say something is going to happen and this is what it is, you need to be squeaky clean and authentic and real. Otherwise, people have got radars; they'll pick up on it. They may not. I believe the colloquial expression is a BS detector. And people are all installed with that from the moment we pop into the world, and we can feel when something doesn't ring true. So if you're pretending to be something for whatever reason, it's not going to work ultimately. You may fool one or two people, but it won't work. You won't have a long run at that, I can guarantee you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you used the word authenticity a couple of times there, and certainly in my own research around trust and the 7 elements of having a trustworthy character, authenticity is number one. It really, everything stems from that. I hate that I have to ask this question, but how should people be more authentic?
No, it's a super question. It's very interesting. I always think, well, let me perhaps explain a bit from my own experience. When I was younger, significantly younger than I am now, perhaps in my late teens, early 20s, when I first went to drama school, like many young people, I was trying on different caps, thinking, oh, I like that, I'll be more like that. And perhaps it was more exaggerated, that effect at drama school. I don't know why, because you're kind of in the process of being stripped down, your personality internally, and then put back together again, everything, vocal, voice, everything. And I assumed things that really didn't fit me. And I did them habitually for a while, certain traits of my character. I thought I needed to be like this. And I assumed that, such as I think, I mean, you'll find it ridiculous perhaps, but I thought I had to be more, sort of more of a man's man. I don't know why. We'd have to go back in time to find out why. But the point is, I was trying to assume something that wasn't me, didn't fit with me. I didn't feel comfortable in my own self, but still I pursued it because the voices in my head told me you need to be doing this because of X, Y, and Z. Now, I don't think my experience is so strange or unique when I speak to other human beings. We all seem to have done, if we're not doing it right now, assume a way of being, perhaps in the workplace because you think you'll win more friends and influence people or get more money or this, that, and the other, be more popular. So it's hard, particularly as we live in a society where we're bombarded constantly with messages, and never more so now than in the times of social media, where the kind of craziest things are perpetrated upon you. Some of the stuff's really good, in my opinion, but some of it's out there. And if you're not solid, I would hate to think of me back when I was young being exposed to all this, because I don't know where I'd end up. What I think one needs is a centered root, a connection with yourself, knowing yourself, if you like. And how you achieve that is, well, there are many ways. First of all, I would engage with things that one genuinely enjoys, things that nourish you. Myself, I like dancing. I do Cuban dancing. I've done it for many, many years. And I like gardening, amongst other things. And I make sure I get plenty of those in because they root me in myself. They support me. They tell me, hey, you know who you are. These are things you like. This may sound a bit flippant, but once you've connected in that way, you can then carry those out into other areas of your life. We've all met people, I'm sure, and you have a sense sometimes people are not really comfortable in their own skin for whatever reason, without digging deep. I mean, someone once said, be kind to people. You don't know what they're going through. And I agree, you don't. You've no idea at all. But some folk you meet and they feel genuine, for want of a better word, because they're kind of comfortable with themselves to a degree, and others not so much. Awkwardly, socially, perhaps speaking very manically, stuff like this. We see it all the time. So the best thing is to connect with yourself, and to do that, There are various exercises you can do with breathing and centering and all sorts of things like that. But just in a general, everyday sense, do things that are good for you, that you enjoy, that nourish you, that help you remind you of who you are, what you care about, and be that authentically.
I love that, because so often we are, especially in the day and age with social media, and there's just so many, as you said, so many things bombarding us that can influence us in ways that can be quite insidious sometimes. We have this pressure to always perform, and we're almost being told what's socially acceptable for a high, let's just use the general, to high performing entrepreneur or high performing person. You know, a high performing person may not do gardening, for example, or you rarely hear that, but that's something that's true to yourself. So I love what you said there around, you know, do something that you enjoy, something that nourishes you. And it doesn't have to be within this framework or box of high performance or progress. It could be something that you just simply do because you truly enjoy it. If anything, that should be a form of progress, because you are connecting with yourself more deeply. So I love what you shared there. And there were some huge connotations around listening, almost kind of listening to yourself, but listening to others. I want to touch on this, because when most people talk about communication, they forget the other half of communication, which is so powerful, which is listening. Could you share something about that? You know, what are your views around listening? How well or how badly is it being done? And how can one become a better listener? And why is it so important?
Yeah, to go back to what I was talking about before about the gardening and listening, you do, because what happens when you're doing something you enjoy, and it really doesn't matter what it is, could be crocheting, could be climbing around Everest. It doesn't, the thing itself doesn't matter. The fact that you are engaged and energized by it is what matters. And in that particular state, that's your kind of optimum state, really, for doing what you need to do in your professional life as well. Obviously, with a different focus and different sets of details and what have you, but the same state, it's exactly the same. So when I'm gardening, for example, when I'm out there with getting the dirt under my fingernails, you connect in detail with what you're doing. You notice lots of tiny things. You look at the plants you're trying to bring on. How well are they doing? Why is that? What have you done? It's a system, a process based on observation, hypothesis, and then putting something into practice and seeing how it works. This is exactly the same as healthy communication. In fact, it's how we learn. The hypothesis, you know, taking in information, the brain, for example, with language, the brain then begins to organize it when you're younger, the grammar of it, etc., etc. And then you test it out. Why a child, for example, would say, "Yes, mummy, I did it." And the mum will go, "Ah, yes, you did, didn't you, darling?" And the brain goes, "Oh, wait a minute, she didn't say anything," and starts perhaps changing the hypothesis and testing something new. Did, it happens, is, this is a man who studied linguistics, is an irregular verb, so it doesn't take the ed ending that many of the regular verbs do. But you can't tell a tiny little 1/2-year-old that. The brain is already organizing that. It recognizes things within language and organizes it. So the same is true when you pay attention to people. And I think, postulating earlier that you do this naturally if you're enjoying the conversation you're having. So the first thing is, you do need to, I believe, from my own experience and people I've worked with, you do need to have a switch that turns you on and wakes you up. So you're energized when you're connected with people. This I call, when I work with people, the sort of minimum professional level of energy you bring to any engagement. When you do that, it's the same as if you take an example, if you're talking about something you really love, something you're passionate about, you really care about, perhaps it's the thing we were talking about before with me, gardening or dancing, you'll notice that when people do talk about that, that their manner of communication often changes quite radically sometimes. Their eyes open more, they lean forward, they gesticulate more to emphasize. They also extraordinarily select very appropriate vocabulary. This is something I discovered through my work and observation. That's available to us if we're tuned in and plugged in. No need, in a sense, to prepare before. This is perhaps a bit controversial. You do prepare, but there's no need to write out precisely what you're going to say. On the contrary, that can often become a prison. In the moment, if you're plugged in and you know your topic, which you do, otherwise why would you be there talking about it? You find the words to describe exactly what it is. And here's the important part: to the person you're talking to or the people you're talking to. No good finding the words that just happen to be right for you. It's got to be for them. And this goes back to listening and watching. Because you then see, for example, as even without my glasses, as I'm watching now, I notice there's nods, and I notice there's a kind of neutral, I suppose I'd call it Moeed's listening face. And if there was, if there was a huge veer away from that, I'd go, oh, okay, perhaps I've lost them a bit, perhaps I need to change tack, all unconsciously, pretty much, once you practiced it a bit. But we naturally observe people, listen and watch in this way. Often, though, sadly, we judge very quickly. We're quick to judge. I mean, it's a genetic imperative in a sense. It comes from the need to protect ourselves, and so we see something, we go, oh, it's that. Actually, it isn't that. As I said earlier, be kind to people. You don't know what they're going through. And what you can do, though, is without judging, is just observe and notice how people listen, their body posture, the vocal qualities they bring. You tune in more. So not only, importantly, are you listening to the content, of course it's important to listen to that, but you're also listening to how they deliver it. And it gives you a sense of where they are and gives you many more platforms, really, in how you respond. You can perhaps match them if they talk a bit more rapidly and their delivery is more paced like that and quite urgent, then you might just turn yours up a little bit. It's not being false, or it's got to be you doing that. But then you are much more than just the one you present in a professional role. When I said being authentic earlier, I mean having access to all of you and bringing it to bear where you need to, as the situation demands. So listening is key. Listening silently. Watch, listen, and wait. And sometimes, perhaps, if someone's, depending on the context, perhaps it's a potential client, you can say to them at the end, is there anything more about that? You're just kind of checking there's no more water left in it, it's all been poured out. And in those moments, often they can tell you something quite special, something they forgot. And it could be a key point. And then once you've fully listened, you're then in a position to pick the key elements and respond. It's a fascinating game, really.
Man, Richard, there is so much there that you shared that was incredibly valuable. And you talked about, listen, because most people, when you hear listening, they think about listening with their ears. But what you're really talking about is not just listening with your ears, but you're listening with your eyes, your heart, your mind, right? And listening, and that's how you kind of listen with your whole self. One thing you talked about earlier was the and I'm looking at my notes here, the minimal professional level of engagement and making sure that you are switched on and energized. Can you talk a bit more about that? Because that sounds hugely interesting.
Well, I noticed when I started out, after a few years, you have a group of people and some of them straight away strike you. And way back then, we weren't really doing that on video. It was all in the room. But they catch you just with an intro going around the room. And so I thought, that's interesting. Oh, let's do a game. And I got people afterwards to silently vote on which introduction they most remembered. And then we started breaking down why that was. And we found really that it was a combination of things. It could have been something humorous, but very often it was about the presence the person brought, or if you like, the energetic presence. They perhaps wouldn't describe it like that, but I would. It starts really, and this goes back to all the work we did in acting with the voice. The voice needs breath to support it. And if you don't have breath, it needs deep breath. You need to breathe deeply. So your diaphragm contracts, pushes down, you fill your lungs. But most people breathe up here. Even a doctor say, take a deep breath in. They mean up here. That's not a deep breath. It's a very shallow breath. It requires a lot of energy for not much result. So to breathe deeply means you root and ground yourself and have the ability then to deliver an energized vocal presence. So that's one element about it. So that there's a connection between precisely what you want to say and the breath you use to say it. So for example, if you're speaking, you don't drop down at the end. What? You don't drop down at the end. Your breath continues to support your voice right to the end of the point you're making, whether that's one word, that was actually two, so not a great example, or indeed, to be or not to be, that is the question, whether you're doing a Shakespeare soliloquy, it doesn't matter, but there's a correlation between the breath and the message you want to deliver. They work together in tandem. So that's one fundamental form of vocal energy. But how do you get people to bring that? I went through 3 years of doing voice every day, which I hated when I was a teenager, but I'm grateful for retrospectively. And that's not going to work. And often there just isn't time with the time I have to work with clients to do that, unless they're long term and I can work more deeply with them. So I noticed also that when people do, as I mentioned earlier, when people engage and talk about something they really enjoy, they really care about, they're deeply passionate about, they do all of this stuff anyway. I often video people, or if we're in a group, they can be each other's feedback. But someone, for example, let's just use the simple thing of an introduction. People go, it's an introduction. Often the way they're run and organized is a bit humdrum and boring. It's not very originally done in meetings. Well, let's just go around the table, all right, just wake me up when we've finished. So people are already battling against a scenario where they're encouraged to be bland and grey and boring. But if they are speaking about something they really care about, people animate and bring energy. If they do it then, it's a very easy thing to carry that across. If you make them aware of what they're doing, how they look, how they sound, how they come across, it's a very easy thing to take that across into a professional context. Simple. Now, I just want to be clear, because it's a subtle thing, this. What we've just covered is, yes, if you distinguish, most people are not energized. So what we look at is to get this more energized delivery. But then, of course, that's not, the energy is appropriate, but the sort of enthusiasm isn't always. It depends on the context and who you're with. So we've also got to look at how to move between a delivery or a connection that's either more people focused, which this one is, or more business focused. Now, the truth is we're on a cline and we move between them depending on the context. But let me just give you an example. For example, if I'm just about people, I'd speak like this. Hi, Moed, it's good to meet you. Listen, blah, 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 that kind of thing. But if it was a very more business-like connection, because of the status, because of the sector you're working in, often the financial law sectors can be quite conservative, quite top-heavy, male-dominated. Yeah, we won't go into that. I was just about to go. This is not the place. But the point is this. Then I would give a different kind of delivery. I'd say, good morning, Moed. I'm glad you're here. Let's move forward. We've got 3 points we'd like to discuss. And you can hear that's a completely different delivery. But it's all me. That's me. That part of me is not the part I choose to go to often. But if I need to, I do. And some of the clients I work with, to win their trust, if I'm working with partners at a law firm or senior civil servants for the government, I need to come in that way. Good afternoon. Because I've got to be credible for them. If I come in and, hey, should we hug? Then it's that, from the get-go, that's not a good intro. They don't believe I'm the guy who can do the job they need doing. So we all need to do that, to adapt and blend, but not in a way that we're putting something on. Perhaps initially, as we play around with it, we're putting it on a little bit, but in a way that is authentic and genuine and real. And it's very easily doable, in my experience.
Are there any exercises that you typically go through in order to get yourself energized? You talked about breathing, obviously being that medium by which you can actually express your words. And obviously the more breath you have, the more you're going to be able to do so. Do you have any exercises that you kind of recommend, like quick exercises that you recommend for people to get themselves energized and ready for a communication?
You know, if you have to present to a meeting or a room full of people, or even one or two people, we don't really want to see you warming up as you begin the presentation. I mean, if you pay money to go and see a band or a show, a West End show, you don't expect to see them doing the sound check as you walk in, although some fans would love that. I would personally, if it was one of my favorite. It's more authentic and real. But you know what I mean? You've paid your money, so you want to see something from the get-go, sharp and ready for action. So it's best to do that before you begin, outside, in the loo, it doesn't matter where. First of all, there's lots of stuff you can do, you know, to release the tension that accrues in your shoulders. They're not exercises that are esoteric and hidden. Everybody knows about them. You know, roll your shoulders, roll your neck, shake out, massage your face, wake it up. Tongue twisters are good for enunciation. Run on the spot, boom. So then do you tie up, walk in, and you're calm, but inside you have fire. You know, without going into great detail, just generally anybody can warm themselves up. Then, once you're more experienced, you don't need to do that. I don't do that. I've been doing this for 20 years. If I have to give a speech, I might just stretch my mouth a little bit, particularly if I haven't spoken that morning, and then boom, off I go. Because the energy of connection is, because Moeed, the force is always with me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And even that, even though to you they seem simple, they're actually powerful, because, you know, if you're going to exercise or go to the gym, a lot of people will stretch and warm up beforehand, but very few people, from my observation, would stretch or warm up their vocal muscles and their energetic disposition and muscles before a meeting, right? So, you know, just doing that before is extremely powerful. And I loved what you said, which is you're relaxed, but inside, what was it you said? You've got fire inside. And that was really powerful. And the other thing that I picked up on, Richard, was you know, you talked about being energetic. You talked about a few things. Number one, there was different sides to you, right? You've got the side where you're just talking to people, and then there's another side to you where maybe if you're conversing with a partner in a law firm, you know, accounting, or in the government or public sector, where do you, maybe this is more philosophical conversation, but how do you kind of, how do you become aware of the line where different parts to you versus becoming inauthentic? Maybe this is maybe too philosophical a discussion for this conversation here, but that did pop into my mind, because if there are different parts to you, then how do you know whether there are different parts of the authentic you, or you've created that other side of you for the purpose of communication and performing?
Oh, it's not too philosophical for me, Moeed. I think it's wonderful. A lot of people, when I work with them, have said and do say, particularly if they, okay, what happens is, stepping back to get the big picture, the overview, the macro view. What happens is, when we're young, anyone who's got kids or been around kids can see that their imaginations and their sense of who they are, it's often like quicksilver. It moves here and there very quick, much more quickly than ours. Solid old adults who can't really, come on, Daddy. Yes, I'm. Look, Daddy, a shark. Yes, it's green. No, it isn't, Daddy. It's got, you know, the daddy trying to keep up, but he can't. The kid is too flighty. Now, what happens in my experience as we get older is, and we go through life's experiences, we start deciding, making choices, conscious or unconscious, on who we are and what we are and how we behave. And often, as we get older and older, that narrows down, narrows, until actually we operate within very narrow boundaries of who we are and what we are, etc., etc. That changes depending on we're at work or with family or trusted people, but basically it's fairly narrow. And yet, the potential is, I suppose, coming from an acting background, where actually the antithesis of that is encouraged. You're exploring who you are and who you could be diversely. In fact, in a sense, apart from the technical aspects, what an actor's stock in trade really are a childlike imagination, being able to move and change and quick, you know. They've hung on to that and developed it into adulthood. But then we all have, in a sense. And many people go into work and would say to you, were you privy to their innermost thoughts, hey, you know what, Richard, Moed, this isn't really me. Really, I'm a bungee jumper. I'm a thrill seeker. That's who I really am. I'm not a boring old accountant. No disrespect, I value the accountants I've worked with. But they don't, you wouldn't know that from them because they don't allow themselves access to that when they're doing their accountancy work. All well and good, and understandably so. I would say, a bit like riding a bike, for example, with language, we are born technically with the ability to speak language. We have the physical things in place, and the brain's development kicks in, and we start acquiring our language very quickly. It's all being equal, it's all pre-designed. However, we are not born with the same equipment with regards riding a bicycle. We learn to do that. We learn it, and at first, if you remember, pretty much everyone rides a bicycle. You fall off, you graze your knees, you cut, but then one day you get confident, you take off, what do they call the little training wheels, the side wheels, and boom, off you go, and you ride. And then many years later, someone would say to you, oh, Moed, how do you ride a bike? And Moed would probably say, I don't know what you mean, you just ride it. Because Moed doesn't remember, and Richard doesn't remember what it took, doesn't remember the stages of acquiring that knowledge. However, the ability to ride a bike is no less inauthentic within you than the ability to utilize language, because you can quickly assume aspects and they become part of you. I've worked with people, for example, when I've needed them to, you're trying to get them to win over high status people. And I said, you can't go up to them and just go, oh, hi, George. It doesn't work. It has to be. And they go, I'm not like that naturally. Oh, you're not. And what about when, little Susan or Johnny are naughty and you say, on the naughty step now. Oh, and suddenly what comes out? You have that element within you. You're human. You have it within you. Beyond the cultural and social mores, your ability is there. It's there within you. Perhaps it needs waking up a little bit. So it may feel initially a little inauthentic, but just like riding a bicycle, you imagine a kid riding a bike going, oh, Daddy, yeah, I'm not going to ride the bike anymore. Why not? It's so inauthentic, the experience. It's just not me. And of course, as I was saying earlier, the older you get, the more inclined you'll be, particularly if you're, for want of a better word, a bit more at the perhaps shy or introvert end of the spectrum within certain contexts. You might, but pretty much, I can say, yeah, pretty much. I'd like to say everyone, but something English in me stops me. Everyone I've worked with transforms and moves and acquires it. It's not fake or inauthentic. It's not fake it till you make it. I'm not a big fan of that expression. The idea that assuming something on the outside, because you can assume it and absorb it quickly. And it's not a huge change, it's quick. It's often like changing state. You feel a bit lethargic, you don't want to go out. You were saying earlier going to the gym or something, and you're sitting and maybe the telly's on or more likely the phone, and you're comfortable and you don't want to get up. But if you can just make that little tiny distance to the front door and out, once, if I asked you 5 minutes later, how do you feel? You'd go, I feel great, I'm energized. And I said, do you remember how you feel when you felt when you were sitting? Not really, because you don't. Our state changes very, very quickly. And unless we're perhaps suffering something severe in life, which we all do from time to time, we don't tend to hang on to our states. They move. They're very fluid. So you learn how to speak to the high status person so you can win them over, get them on your side and get what you need, something that works for both of you, because I find that's the best resolution in most negotiations. In a year, I ask you, oh, how was it? Oh, it's fine. How did you do it? What do you mean, how did I do it? It's just what I do. Oh, really? I remember when you didn't feel so confident about that, but it's very quick. I've waffled on a bit. I think it's your turn now, Moed.
No, not at all. This was hugely interesting, and I feel like we could talk about this for hours. And there are two main questions that I really want to make sure we cover in the time. One of them is you talked about speaking to high status people, and you talked about NLP. I heard it from NLP, but matching and mirroring, right? So you're kind of matching the tone, the way in which the person communicates. and it's not just the language, it's the pace, the tonality, etc. How do you advise people to, as quickly and as authentically as possible, match, identify the right kind of things that they should be matching and therefore do it? Maybe we can't go into the whole how you can do it. Maybe it's as simple as basically doing something similar and it requires practice, but how can someone quickly identify what it is that they should be mirroring and they should be matching?
Well, I think for clarity, we should say that these things and many other things from NLP come from observation of human behavior. It's not something and you're not suggesting that, but just for clarity for the audience, it's not something someone's saying, hey, it would be a good idea if. No, people have watched people and seen how they behave. And the mirror and matching thing is an element of that. In fact, if you go into a cafe or a pub or a bar or something at a certain time of night where people, perhaps on a Friday evening, and just watch, you'll see it happening perfectly naturally, because people are, as we were talking about earlier, switched on and engaged and enjoying the conversation. So, if someone's leaning on a table, the other person will be leaning on a table as well. Someone's nodding, the other person will nod. It's a natural human behavior. It's how we say unconsciously, I am like you and you are like me. That's a root thing about human interaction. If we were, well, we are primates, but if we were other primates, perhaps if you were you were the alpha male, perhaps what I'd try and do as a younger male is try and groom your back or something, so I get with you and I get some status that way, and while I'm doing it and making submissive noises and gestures, I look at the other ones going, hey, look where I am, buddy. So they have and that's fascinating as well, and humans do that as well. But the key element really in this is that it's a natural set of phenomena that people do, because the key to real human connection is commonality, that I am like you, you are like me. It's why, for example, culturally, Americans often, because it's such a huge country, if I meet you and you're American, I am, and we're in London, for example, we might often say, where are you from, where are you from? And then I might say, oh, I've got a cousin who lives in blah, blah. And we're trying to make that commonality connection. Brits often do it with humor, sort of self-depreciating humor. If we both do it, then we kind of go, oh yeah, we got that whole British thing going on, and there's a connection there. And but culturally, pretty much everyone does it in one way, shape, or form, be it formal or informal, but it's there. So this mirroring and matching is common human behavior, and the reason one does it is because then we feel the other unconsciously feels more connected to you. As to what you do, it is subtle. It's not mimicking, for example. It's very subtle. But again, just as we were talking earlier about listening, and I kind of introduced the idea of watching or looking, it's based on that. You won't really need to think, what do I need to mirror or match, if you're listening and watching. In fact, you may find yourself doing it quite unconsciously. So, someone leans in, you lean in a bit. I've seen it. I went to an interview once to work at another drama school, years ago, and the woman who was interviewing me, at a key point in the interview, she was sitting on a chair next to me. She leant back. Now, I know why she did that. Because she wanted to see whether I would lean back. It was so, we'd been sitting upright, and she, at a key point, and she changed the way she spoke, she leaned back. I have to say, Maureen, I didn't choose to follow along. Perhaps I didn't want the job that much. Because also it was blatant and unsophisticated, like smashing a custard pie in someone's face. And people use these. You must have been on these, I think, dreadful workshops where people get everyone running to the back of the room. They train them and get everyone running to the back of the room because you can get a free copy of my £50 DVD or set or something like that. And once they've done that, they then know that they can, in their world, that they can sell to them. What they're usually selling at that stage is often a weekend instead of half a day, the weekend one. And I really don't like that. I don't like it because I find it exploitative. and disrespectful. Regardless, people might say, well, Richard, they want the DVD. Okay, they do, fine. But I don't think you're appealing to their best qualities there, and for me, that's very important personally. And so I don't utilize those, and I'm talking to you because we're having a chat. I don't utilize those in my work and my training and my coaching. It has to be mutually respectful. So if you can match, if someone feels a little far away from you, just take a little thing they're doing, you're watching them, perhaps you notice they're leaning to one side, and that's the thing that strikes you most. So lean to one side, and just gently, and just carry on from there. The other thing is, from an acting perspective, that's one way of changing or developing a performance. When I was younger, I had to play old men. I don't need to act now. I am an old man, but and if you stooped over a bit, it started to affect your physiology, and then how your voice is produced, and then of course how you feel. Chemistry happens. So when you're enjoying the connection with someone, you do it naturally. So I don't think it's a question, to finally fully answer your question, it's not a question of choosing what to do so much as to work on connecting and plugging in to the person. And you'll find that you do it naturally, not like the woman in the interview.
Yeah. So that was really interesting, because again, you're talking about the connotations around, not connotations, you're talking about listening with your eyes and your other sensory faculties, not just your ears, and there's still that thread of authenticity that you keep talking about as well. So I thought that was really interesting. There's one other topic I really want to make sure we cover today, and that is virtual communication. How does that, I mean, there are obvious things as to how it differs from live communication, but in your view, what are some of the important things that people should remember and be aware of in order to effectively communicate and also create that connection and engagement with people through a virtual setting?
Yes, after, we've all done loads of that during COVID. And of course, some companies have decided, well, it's a good idea. Let's keep doing it. It costs less. We don't have to send people over the other side of the world. Well, I think the first thing to remember is that if you're in a meeting anyway, a live meeting, often those meetings, in my experience, with respect to those who organize and run them, are not run well. People are not stimulated within them. They get kind of sleepy. They have to fight to stay awake because of the format. That's a whole other topic. Perhaps we can talk about that another time, how to run successful meetings. But the point being that all this stuff we've been talking about, being energized, switched on, if you've got, I don't know, a couple of minutes to put something in, or you wish to raise an objection, or you wish to contribute, then best do it fully energized and switched on. And then times that by 3 for a virtual meeting, because this screen, this board of faces, interesting that board, although it's a homonym, isn't it? It sounds the same, but it means something different. But I think it's appropriate, because people do get very bored in those. Their energy drops down. Again, part of that, if you're running one of these meetings, is how can I engage people in a way? How can I vary their interaction, get them into breakout rooms, bring them back? The group contributes, utilizing the chat function to answer questions, as varied as possible, so people are moving from one thing to another to keep them doing different things. That's if you're running a meeting. I'm doing a training on Monday, or Tuesday actually. So I better be good to my word. And it's true, you have to. And it's much harder to gauge as well the level of interest or connection. When you can hear it, you can get people to vocalize, you can get people to say, but you need to do that, really. And one of the ways you do it is by looking at the little, well, on my Mac, it's a green light. You may have other colors are available, but it's where the camera is. If I look at that now, then I'm engaging with you. It appears to you, the viewer, that I'm talking directly to you. But if I look at you, then I'm no longer looking at you as far as you see. I am. So really, it's about, you have to up the ante and do it more for your audience. It's very strange and unnatural to talk to a green light. And I can still see you peripherally nodding, and I can sort of see your eyes and get a sense of where you are, as I can the other people. But when I'm speaking, that's where I need to be. because that's the eye contact is super important, even more so perhaps than in a live situation. And we said earlier when we were chatting that before we started that not everyone processes with the eyes, but a lot of people do. A high percentage of people do prefer eye contact, and it talks about all sorts of things like your credibility, your gravitas, your sincerity, all those kind of things are judged by that. Because if I talk like this a little bit and look away, immediately I look like a shifty criminal. I look like a criminal at worst, but now I look like a shifty criminal, which is even worse. So definitely that's huge. If you're organizing meetings, make sure you've got lots of variety of interaction and a system whereby people can interact. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to raise their hands? Put the little emoji up there. Do you want them to freeform it? Depending on the situation, vary it. As far as taking part, the energizing we said before, you go off and do it twice as much before you sit down. And also, if you're organizing those meetings, lots of breaks. Give people comfort breaks and tell them to go away from the computer and go and walk around. I know that's not often possible, and people say, well, and they go off and do an email. So basically, they haven't moved away from the computer, and they come back possibly excited by the email or possibly even more drained than they were before. It's challenging, and I think it's far from ideal. It's convenient and works economically, particularly if you're a large organization and you're doing business with people on all parts of the globe. At the same time, it has many drawbacks because the magic in human interaction really happens when we're in the room with each other. Have I gone some way to answering your question? I don't know.
You absolutely have, Richard. I mean, I've taken a ton of notes, right? So, this was incredibly valuable for me, and I'm sure it will be for our viewers and listeners as well. Couple of questions just quick fire questions that I always ask our guests when they join the show. First one is, are there any particular experts or authors, books that you recommend people should read? It doesn't have to do with communication, right? It could be something that you've read recently and you found it really valuable, and it's something you want to share with our viewers and listeners. Who would they be? Do you have any recommendations?
I do, but I've got the memory of a goldfish. So without going to my bookcase to look, off the top of my head, I think one woman who is fascinating. She started off working with actors. She's quite old now. Patsy Rodenberg is her name. And she has a number of books, but one of them particularly, I think she calls it Presence. Yes, she does. And it's entirely based on her own work, initially working with actors in theatre and film, but then working with civilians in all walks of life, observing, developing her theories, which are rooted in practice and are excellent. And I think Presence really is the kind of crowning glory. So certainly that I'd go and have a look and pull some more out, but that off the top of my head. And actually, since we're on Rodenberg, it sounds similar. Marshall Rosenberg, who's not with us anymore, may rest in peace. He developed a system, although he was the first to say, hey, there's nothing new here. I've just ordered things a bit, called nonviolent communication, or NVC, which is a system based on communicating via our emotions, and beneath those, our needs, met or unmet, usually unmet, because that's where problems arise and there's difficulties. It's fascinating because it allows you, through a bit of practice and thinking about it, observation, to hear people not saying, what did you do that for? But going, okay, what's that person not getting? What do they need? They're obviously angry because they're not getting what? What are they? And then perhaps being able to articulate, what it is, and translating, as it were. Initially, you've got to start with yourself because you do that all the time. But then you can be in a position where you can work. And this is so powerful when negotiating, particularly, because you can hear really what the need is, even if it's not being expressed. And we are British. Let's remember, we're not very good at expressing what goes on. But anyway, people aren't used to, particularly men, in my experience, still in the century we live on, aren't used to talking about what's going on for them emotionally. And secondly, certainly have no idea what our needs are. regardless of all the work that's been done, and that we're really a needs-driven species, as is everything else in nature, that we're driven by what we need, and when we don't get what we need, that's when the problems or the challenges start. So that's he's written a number of books, but I can't remember what the sort of root book is, but if you check him out, NVC, Nonviolent Communication, Marshall Rosenberg.
That's really interesting.
It's really life-changing. In fact, that's a book that radically, it shifted my life up a few notches, I have to say. It really helped me personally, and of course professionally as well. I came across it many years ago, but it's good stuff.
Yeah, this sounds really good. I'm going to get that, but I haven't heard of that book before, but certainly will be on my list. How can our viewers and listeners find you and connect with you, learn more about you?
Well, of course I would, if I were a normal fella. I have a website, but I haven't had one for many years. I'm working on getting another one. So the best way to contact me is probably through my LinkedIn profile, which is Richard Fallon with a star before R and a star after N, just to make it stand out. Marie, does it? I don't know. Or they can contact me. My number is 07968 738 190. WhatsApp me, call me, drop me a line. I'll be more than happy to have a chat.
Great. Well, Richard, this has been an incredibly interesting session. I've learned a ton, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners have as well. Really pleased that we got you on the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Moeed. Genuinely, it's been great, and your probing questions and your gentle listening as well. I've really enjoyed it, and if there's something of value there for people, then I'm thrilled. And if there isn't, well, I've enjoyed the experience anyway. But thank you.
No, thank you. And this is Moeed Amin signing off. And if you're interested in learning more about my programs, if you're interested in learning about how to sell like a buyer, I've had the privilege of interviewing 426 buyers so far over the last 15 years across 10 different industries, 9 different functional responsibilities, and 3 different seniority levels to really get into the skin of what makes a buyer value a relationship with a salesperson and the solutions that they have to offer. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please do contact me, link below in the comments. But from me, Moeed Amin, it's bye for now. Thank you.